Alright, what up guys? In this video, I'm going to be showing you guys how to skateboard in Garry's mod, or at least how to like kind of simulate skateboarding in Garry's mod. And this technique also works for snowboarding too, which is why we are here on a snowy map. This is actually the snowy version of GM Fork. GM Fork is actually probably one of the best maps for skateboarding, surprisingly. Or, you know, snowboarding too, I guess, but I would more so call it mountain boarding unless you're on the snowy version of the map. But Fork is really good if you want to do some like street style stuff. There are very few skate park maps in Garry's mod, but there are some there. There is actually the warehouse skate park from Tony Hawk's Pro Skater, which is pretty neat. I will try to remember to include a download link for that if anybody is interested in that one. That's a pretty good one to skate around on. Anyways, what you want to do, obviously, is start out with a hoverboard. I think there's a few hoverboard mods, but what you want is the one that gives you these more like skateboardy looking models. And I tend to prefer the Clouds longboard. It's got like a flat back on it, which will be kind of important for what we're doing. And it's also longer, which just kind of makes tricks in general a little bit easier and more consistent in my opinion. But anyways, if you guys, oh, and I also have the Tony Hawk's Underground 2 player model pack. So if you guys are interested in that, I'll throw in that download link too. But anyways, if you guys are familiar with Garry's mod and the hoverboard system in Garry's mod, you may realize that, yeah, they're pretty cool and all. You can kind of slide around and do some fun stuff, but they're not quite the same as skateboarding. And it's just overall kind of a sort of weird experience in my opinion. Like, you can still do some kind of cool stuff, but they're overall pretty unrealistic and sort of unmaneuverable in my opinion. And there's a pretty quick and easy mod you can do that makes these things actually remarkably fun and maneuverable. You guys can copy these stats if you want. These are pretty much the perfect starting stats. The speed stat doesn't really matter all that much because you're not going to be using this for speed. We're going to be using a thruster, which I'll show you guys here in a second. But what's really important is you want the jump to be as low as it can go, because I'll show you guys what happens. These things jump super fucking high, and I mean, that's obviously way too high, but even at its lowest settings, these things actually, these things actually jump pretty damn high. So like, you'll notice, like, that's like, if we were pretending that this is a skateboard, like, that's pretty high. Like, this thing literally jumps higher than these like, this thing, you can literally ollie higher than the payphones, which is pretty cool and all, but it's pretty unrealistic. So we'll get into tweaking that later, but we're gonna get into just kind of like the basic setup for getting started here. So obviously you're gonna want these settings. Now flip and twist. Twist is gonna be your rotational motion, and then flip is gonna be basically like your manualing and nose manualing motion, right? You're gonna want them here, but eventually you're gonna kind of work your way up to getting these a little bit higher, because basically all these do is affect like how fast you're flipping stuff and all that moves. So it's really going to be down to personal preference, but once you really get used to the speed, it's going to be extremely beneficial to have those speeds higher, and we'll get into that a little bit later. But for now, just copy these settings, place yourself a hoverboard, and we'll get to the thruster portion. But what you're going to want to do is set it to 3000 and set the effects to none, because having it set to Steam is pretty damn annoying. And what you're going to do is you're going to want to set the forward and reverse preferably to some extra buttons on your mouse if you have them. Like, if you have those like those forward and back buttons, like the thumb buttons on your mouse, you're going to want to use those. Use one of them for forward and one of them for reverse. That is going to be the easiest way to do it in my opinion. You might be able to find a way to do it on the keyboard, but it's going to kind of overall affect your maneuverability of the board to like not have that finger free. But essentially you're just going to want to set it to 3000, choose the can just because it's a nice small one. It's always been my favorite thruster. And you're just going to try to place that in the center, like towards the bottom as much as you can. For some reason I find that having it placed up high can affect your player model or something and have you like crash off the board more often. It's pretty weird. It acts pretty wonky. You just gotta like tinker around with it, but I find to have a lot of success that way, so I would just place it where I placed it. And then this is more or less important, but it adds to the overall aesthetic. You're going to want to turn that thing invisible because duh. So basically the way this technique works is you're never going to be using your hover mode. You're always going to be holding the right mouse button and using this sort of like skid around mode. And the reason why we put a thruster on the back is because as you can see here, we don't really have the option to go like forward and backwards when we're in the skid mode. We can do like nose manuals and normal manuals, which is actually like super handy, because you know those are fun for doing tricks and whatnot. And the other thing too is that we actually can't steer either. So if we were to build momentum and slide and steer, you don't really steer, you just like kind of spin and keep sliding forward, which Again, not really all that fun if you're trying to simulate snowboarding or skateboarding. But what the thruster allows us to do is not only build and maintain momentum, so we can build momentum and we can keep going, but it also allows us to maneuver the board by steering it, which is extremely helpful if you want to at least somewhat simulate skateboarding or snowboarding in Garry's mod. Because there's not actually any skateboarding mods, at least that I could find in Garry's mod. So hoverboards are the best thing you get as far as like pretending to skateboard goes. And then now that you have a way to maneuver the board, you can actually do kind of fun stuff like hit rails and do jumps and whatnot. And basically that's it. That's all you need to know to be able to like snowboard or skateboard in Garry's mod. That's going to be like your simple basic setup. Like if you're joining a server that has hoverboard mods, you could always just, you know, pop a 3000 thruster on the back and you're pretty much set to go, as long as you set the settings more or less to what I showed you to set them to. And like I said, you can also kind of simulate snowboarding and stuff, so you can kind of like hit the mountains and actually do some cool tricks. One thing I do recommend if you are playing single player or you have the option to set up a multiplayer server or something, I would turn God mode on, because you are going to be crashing a lot and it does a lot of damage when you hit things and fall. So it's just kind of worth it to have God mode on, because it's a little bit less annoying that way. But yeah, that's the basic setup. And then now I kind of want to get into the more advanced setup and then kind of some of the cool techniques you can do on a hoverboard and trying to pretend to skateboard or snowboard. So the first things first here is that even with the lowest jump height, I still find that you jump pretty damn high and it's kind of annoying. And so what I do, if I'm on a single player server, so you're not going to be able to do this on any server that you join that has hoverboards, sadly. You're pretty much going to be strictly limited to servers that you have control of or just playing a single player game. You're going to go to utilities, you're going to go to the server settings, and what you're going to do is you're going to turn the gravity up. So the default is 600. You can set it to something more like 800, which is a pretty good place to start. And basically what that will do is that will lower our maximum jump height by making gravity just pull down on us more. And even still with like 800 gravity, it's still possibly a little bit higher than I'd want it to be. So let's go up against this wall here. We can get a good idea of how high we jump. So we're jumping like just about to the middle of that brick there. And if we turn it back down to 600, what do we get? So yeah, now we're jumping to the top of that brick. So if we set it to like 900, that'd probably be more perfect, wouldn't it? More perfect. Oh yeah, that's pretty good. Still pretty high, but you don't want it too short, because you still want to be able to do some fun stuff. But there is actually a remedy for that. So what you do is you set it to the height that you really like or whatever. And then if you need extra height when jumping, what you can do is actually bring the tail of the board up and then jump. And what that'll do is give you a bit of an extra boost, and it's almost double the height. I mean, not quite double. It's maybe like a 50% boost, but good God. See, I hate the hover mode. It's very, very unwieldy. But you definitely get a pretty big boost when you bring the tail up. And I think you get an even bigger boost if you bring the front nose up. So if we bring the front nose up and do that, yeah, we get a pretty big boost. We got almost 2 blocks higher, I think, there. So that's what I like to do. I like to set the gravity higher so that like our little normal ollie is kind of more of a small hop, and then if you need more height, you just kind of bring the tail up and you're good to go. And then the other thing that I do actually is I'll even bring the time scale down a little bit, and what that'll do is that will slow down your air time so that you kind of have more hang time in the air, and it'll allow you to kind of maneuver your board a little bit more before you like hit the bottom of a ramp. So like, let's say you're hitting like a vert ramp and you're doing some like flips and tricks, but you got to align your board real quick before you go down the bottom of the ramp. It just makes that a little bit easier. I don't lower it too much. I'll set it to like maybe 0.85, something like that. And then what you want to do there is get rid of this hoverboard, because the thruster isn't going to quite be strong enough with the extra resistance of gravity. Also, what we want to do is, like I said, you want to start bringing this up over time, your flip and your twist, like just, you know, as you start to get used to the speed of the board. So we're going to bring it up probably to like 15 and 13. And yes, I do prefer my flip to be a little bit slower than my twist. It can be a little sketchy having the flip too fast. And so we'll place the board down, and then you're going to want to change the thruster thrust as well. I think I already said that. But yeah, you're going to want to change the thruster thrust. I set it to about 4,000 when I start messing with the gravity. I find that to be a pretty good place. And we're just going to do what we did before. place that on there and turn it invisible. So yeah, now we're like about at the same speed we're at. And that just makes it like a little bit more realistic. So if you wanted to like actually kind of simulate skateboarding or snowboarding, it's not like this superhuman looking powered thing where you're doing 10-foot fucking ollies and, you know, moving at the speed of sound. It makes things a little bit more realistic in my opinion. So anyways, we can kind of hop on the board and start messing around. And it's a little bit easier to line up with rails and stuff and keep ourselves on there because the physics time scale is a little bit slower, so we have a little bit more time to react to that stuff, which is nice. Now the other cool thing about this map, or I guess not necessarily just this map, is if you find some rails somewhere, like some train track rails, they're actually really good for practicing your grinds on because you can kind of get going straight using this as a guide, and then you do a little bit of a hop, you get on there, and you know, it takes a little bit of practice, obviously. I'm still not even that great at it, but it makes it a lot easier to practice lining up with your rails, and then, of course, being able to balance on the rails once you do get onto the rails. So it's nice for training that type of stuff overall. Same thing with these, like, streets and curbs. You can use, like, the curb of the street or these little, like, short walls here as guides as well. A lot of bridges are also really good, so, like, actually, this is a really good example here. A little bridge like this, nice and straight walls, and a flat rail without like a bunch of little, like notice how these rails here have like shit in the way. This is a really nice rail because it doesn't have shit in the way. It's a nice like straight setup. Oh, and it's also a really good example of my ollie being slightly too short the way it is. So this is one where you're gonna have to approach it with like a little bit of a hop to it, and then whoop, hit that rail like that. So, definitely a technique you're going to want to pick up on is that you're going to want to get some extra height for some tricks, and so you're going to have to bring either the tail up, or if you want some extra height boost, you just want to add some like kind of cool flair to it. You do the front nose when you ollie, and that'll get you even more air, or just, you know, extra air in general. Also, one kind of fun thing you can do in regards to ollies, and this works better the faster that you set your flip speed to, what you can do is actually do like more or less realistic ollies, which I'm not like super great at it, and also the speed is probably not as high as it could be for doing this. But you literally just pull the front end up, and then you pop the back end up, I guess, or I guess technically you're bringing the front end back down. But you more or less level out. Oh shit! You more or less level out like at your center line or whatever of the board. So that's another good reason to have the longboard, is that you get more height for doing shit like this. But also if you wanted to do like a natural ollie like that, you get more height from doing that ollie. And this also of course works as a nollie as well, so you can like kind of like approach a trick and do like a whap, something like that. I don't really mess with the realistic ollie all that much, so I'm not like super skilled at doing it, but it is an option if you want to kind of add a little bit of flair to your skateboarding or snowboarding style. You can do like an actual bunny hop thing, or ollie, whatever you want to call it. I guess if you're snowboarding, you would call it a bunny hop. Maybe? I don't know. I'm not a snowboarder, so I don't know. But yeah, that's a cool little trick you can do. Or just, again, a way to flare up your ollies. So another cool benefit of having the thruster on the back, it allows you to actually do, like, you know, mid-air corrections, or, like, corrections on the rail. So there's actually a couple ways you can do corrections if you're, like, hitting a rail. So you can kind of, let's pretend this was a rail. You can actually use like your flip motion to kind of maneuver yourself on the rail and kind of guide your weight to whatever side to balance. But you can also use the thrusters to kind of position yourself on the rail. So that's another good reason why the thruster is nice, because if you're trying to do some tricks like grinding, it allows you to not only kind of help balance yourself on the rail, but let's say you were hitting like a curved rail or something, right? Now, if you were just doing like a normal hoverboard, you could kind of do this. You'd have to like really get your leaning down, and you'd probably have to do a pretty severe lean by the time you hit like the apex of a rail. You'd probably have to be like, you know, almost 45 degrees on that to be able to like, you know, not only keep it from flying off towards the outside of the rail, but also keep it on the rail, right? If that makes sense. Having the thrusters allows you to actually, you know, hit a fucking Jesus Christ, hit a rail like you're grinding, but then also do your minute corrections as you're going around a curve, which if I had a little bit more momentum, I'd be able to fucking show you, right? But I'm sure you get the idea that, you know, obviously, it's easier to line up your tricks, basically, if you actually have... yeah, let's pretend this is a rail. That works. Like, if you actually have a thruster on the back, you can kind of guide your board a little bit more and use it as a way to kind of cheat grinding, but not really, right? Anyways, though, I guess that's pretty much more or less it for the tutorial on how to skateboard. There's not really a whole lot to it. There's some kind of like cool little tricks and maneuvers you can do, but really you just kind of got to get creative with what you got, because there's not a whole lot you can do technically, because obviously it's not really skateboarding. It's honestly more akin to snowboarding. I guess really I should call this a snowboarding tutorial, but this comes from a desire to want to skateboard in Garry's mod for some reason, so I call it a skateboarding tutorial because it's the closest you can get to skateboarding in Garry's mod, at least in my opinion. Unless there is some awesome skateboarding mod that I don't know about, but as far as I know, this is about as close as you can get to skateboarding in Garry's mod, even though it is a little bit more like snowboarding. But anyways, yeah, that's how you skateboard slash snowboard in Garry's mod. You know, hoverboarding in style, I guess, whatever you want to call it. But yeah, anyways, hope you guys enjoyed the video. Hope it helped you guys out. If it did, make sure to leave a like. It definitely helps me out. And if you haven't already, make sure you're subscribed to this channel if you want to check out any more of this content, or any of my other gaming content for that matter. Yeah, with that being said, it's been Plock the Master Gamer with some Garry's mod, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Peace out.